what is the Shemoneh Esrei? Is it a prayer of whispering or is it a prayer of silence? And at that, what is a prayer of silence? How can you have a silent prayer? We're taught that prayer has to be made audible with your mouth. You have to say a prayer. Thinking prayer in your heart is not considered prayer. The Shulchan Aruch says it very clearly and no one argues against that. So here's a very interesting discussion. Again, the Zohar talks about, as well as the Talmud, is how do we pray the Shemoneh Esrei? Now, according to the Gemara, it seems, according to many of the rabbis, that a person has to make sure that his prayer is not heard, but they understand that to mean not heard by others. And everyone makes a point, the Rambam included, that but you yourself need to hear your prayer, because the definition of prayer is audible prayer. How audible? A whisper. On this point, the Rav Yosef Karo comments on bringing a Zohar, saying that according to the Zohar, one is not supposed to even hear his own voice. Meaning not only that your voice should not be heard by the other people around you, but you yourself should not hear your voice. We're talking about an absolute silent prayer. So how can we define that as prayer if it's silent? Because you're moving your lips and there's breath coming out of your mouth, and that's already a level of speech, a level of dibur. It's called silent dibur. And then there's, audible dibur with a whisper. So he says, according to the Zohar, your dibur for Shemoneh Esrei has to be silent. Now, this is where things get a bit interesting. The later rabbis that come after the Shulchan Aruch, like the Magen Avraham and the Vilna Gaon, one of the great Torah scholars of the later years, both argue with the Shulchan Aruch in what the proper pshat is in that Zohar. And they both say that really that Zohar is not mukhrach, it doesn't have to mean silent. It could mean exactly like the Gemara that we mentioned, that you can hear yourself, but others shouldn't hear you. And they say no, they reject the explanation of the Shulchan Aruch, and they say no, that really the Gemara is in line with the Zohar, and everything is one idea, that you have to at least hear your own words very, very quietly. The Mishnah Berurah, who was the final posek for Ashkenazim, and today all Ashkenazim follow him, of course, bring the discussion. He brings this exact discussion and then concludes, in accordance with the Magen Avraham and the Vilna Gaon, that you should make your prayer audible to yourself but not to others. Now, what's interesting to point out right now is historically, different writings from the Arizal took time till they surfaced. Meaning that even after the Arizal wrote and taught his teachings to Rav Chaim Vital, and Rav Chaim Vital recorded it all, it took time till all of his books spread out. So today we have access to a book called Olat Tamid from Rav Chaim Vital, again explaining the teachings of the Arizal. And in that book he explains explicitly that the proper pshat in the Zohar, according to the Arizal, is like the Beit Yosef, that you should not even hear your own words when you daven. It should be an absolute silent Shemoneh Esrei. He even goes further and explains al pi Kabbalah why it should be that way, explaining that the level of the silent Amidah that we pray individually, the level we're on is still the external forces of negativity can grab hold of those tefillot. So they have to be absolutely silent, making them less physical. In that way, they're protected from the negative forces from being able to grab hold of them. He explains that the repetition of the Amidah is on a higher level, and once we're on that level, then there's no concern of the negative forces attaching, and that's why the repetition of the Shemoneh Esrei is said loudly, because that's already a level spiritually where the negative forces can't touch them. And so with this, interesting new information, things might perhaps change, because once we have the Arizal himself explaining that the Pshat in the Zohar is like the Bet Yosef, and explaining al pi Kabbalah why it has to be so then there's no room here to say that it's a mistake. Because although many manuscripts came to Europe with different mistakes, this is clearly the right Pshat, and all of the Sephardi rabbis and Mekubalim accepted this as the correct Pshat. So now let's reevaluate this machloket and see how we might come out. So for Sephardim, the way to proceed obviously would be that the Mechaber himself would be enough to rely on against the other poskim, but for sure with the Ari himself holding this way, then there's not even a question. We ideally lichatchila would pray the Shemoneh Esrei silent and not worry about anything else. That would be absolutely, in our opinion, the correct way to do it. The Ben Ish Chai talks about this. He talks about his father actually, praying with a whisper and then switching to pray silently. And from heaven, they told him that he should continue praying with a whisper because it was easier for him that way. And the Chida also talks about this, saying that if you could pray properly silently, it's better to pray silently. But if you'll pray better by making a whisper, so then you can also whisper, because ultimately, we're not all on the level of the Kabbalists to do everything in that way. So if we'll pray better with a whisper, so then he says that for the average person, if it's better for him to whisper, he could whisper. But the ultimate way according to the Sephardi halacha, to pray Shemoneh Esrei would be absolutely silent. Now, how about the Ashkenazim? So I discussed this with a few Rabbanim Ashkenaz, and they said that since the Vilna Gaon argues against the Pshat and the Zohar, so he might continue to argue against the Arizal's Pshat, and they were allowed to have more than one opinion. So he would say that the Ashkenazim would look at it like the Arizal has his opinion, and the Gra has his opinion, and it's still a machloket, and because of that machloket, so we say Shei v'al taseh adif, meaning that since everyone agrees that at least b'diavad you fulfill the mitzvah when you say it, quietly, so for the Ashkenazim, they would still continue to say it quietly.